Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Nerdy for 30, the podcast where comedian Tim Keck and I talk about nerdy-ish things for 30-ish minutes. Today we are talking about The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, which was voted for by you. This was chosen as the number one thing that you wanted us to talk about this month. I'll be honest, we talked a lot of shit on The Lord of the Rings on this show prior to this getting voted in. I think sporadically throughout the history of this show, we have both expressed our disinterest generally with the Tolkienverse. Tim has on multiple occasions flat out stated how he despises hobbits. Very passionate about his hatred of hobbits.
My mind hasn't changed.
So we're going to get into it over that. When this was chosen, I was surprised. The Lord of the Rings doesn't normally, it's not like present that much in my nerddom. And when they announced the show was coming out, I haven't really heard anything about it online. So I really didn't know anybody was watching it. You know what? Watched it for the show. Fucking loved it. What a great show.
It's great. It's awesome. It's so cool. It looks amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about like the graphics and like Marvel stuff last week. I heard they spent $1 billion on this show.
No,
this is
no
like
way that's
their
right. Really?
whole thing. I think it was like close to $1 billion. This could just be me talking out of my ass. I think they spent $1 billion on this whole show. It looks like it. It looks like it. I think one of the things I was listening to when they were talking about that is like a lot of that is like building a lot of these like practical sets. Mm-hmm. And so they're viewing it as like an investment because now they're building the groundwork for future seasons. And this is something they're planning on really becoming their thing. I mean, I remember someone at Apple was like, you know, where's our Lord of the Rings? Or no, not where's our Lord of the Rings? Where's our House of Game of Thrones? I mean, it's honestly made me forget. These are all bullshit. I mean, the names are crazy. The rings of houses. It's all, I mean, it feels like it's jumbled apart. They're interchangeable in a lot of ways. We're definitely going to have to compare and contrast House of Dragons with Rings of Power in a spoiler-free way. I will not spoil anything for House of Dragons, but it's hard to not compare these. They came out on the same time. They're both two huge investments from these companies. House of the Dragons kind of feels like they're like, well, we've already got this set, so why don't we just run this back with other actors? You know, it's kind of got that vibes, lower production value, lingering shots.
Ooh.
Rings of Power is like off the charts. Everything looks amazing. The costumes are insane. It looks great. It feels great. At moments, it looks too real. Honestly, when they're showing like all the bloody corpses and like the amputees and like the victims of war. I don't know if we need to go into all that reality, but it was great. It was great. Kevin, what did you love it?
Oh my God, I did. I want to lock into one thing right away that you said, which is that for House of the Dragon, it felt like they had the sets and they were like, let's run this back with other actors. For the majority of House of the Dragon so far, the cast has felt like other actors. They haven't really felt iconic in their roles, with the exception of a couple people like Matt Smith. I think one of the things that's so good immediately about this show is that the casting is fucking amazing. I don't know, again, I don't really have that much background with the Tolkien universe. Maybe this show is best enjoyed not really having that much preconceived love for Tolkien stuff, but not knowing any of these characters, who really they're supposed to be or how they may or may not fit into the larger story of the Fellowship of the Rings and all that. I really I think every actor on this show, everybody feels iconic within a couple minutes of seeing that person. They do the Ghostbusters thing I always rant about. They show us the character. We meet them while they're doing the thing they're going to keep doing for the rest of the series or movie or whatever it is. And I mean, everybody's just fucking bringing their A game to this. It's amazing.
A lot of the characters get like little entrances too. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I've watched the movies multiple times. I read the books. Again, I'm not like a stickler for it. It's like a little too dense for me to really be diving in. They introduce almost every character as if we're all going to be like, oh, so so and so showed up, and I'm like, there's no way the third guy that helps the queen is someone we should be freaking out about. There's no way the 10th elf we've seen so far is someone I should know their name already. Like, that's crazy. But they do it in a way where like every character has weight, every introduction matters, or most introductions matter, and it's great. I just really care about these characters in a way, again, comparing with House of Dragons, just it doesn't seem to click.
I'm thinking that might be related to the fact that they are playing the long game here. So we already know in advance it's going to be 5 seasons. Amazon's already paid for it. Like you said, they're building the sets because they plan on using that for all 5 seasons of the show. So maybe they have also said that some of the stuff that they have written into the first season won't pay off until the final season. So maybe when we get those prolonged entrances, that's a situation where we are like, why the fuck is the third elf getting this big entrance? But it's because that third elf is going to go on to be a really big figure in the show, even if they're not in the first season much, which I love. I love that kind of forward thinking, especially in a situation where it's already bought and paid for and we know we're going to get it. Because so much of this shit, I know I've talked about Doctor Who a few other times on this podcast. So many of these nerd TV shows are just writing by the seat of their pants and have to spend the first 5 minutes of an episode convincing you that this background character you saw once has actually been very important the whole time. It just kills me from a narrative sense. It takes me way out of it. I'm like, you just figured this out while you were driving the car. I hate this. I'm no longer invested in this story.
I have really tried my best to disengage this show mentally from everything I know about the Lord of the Rings. I'm really trying to look at it as its own standalone thing. And some of the characters are familiar and some people show up and you're like, oh, so that's this guy. But the show stands alone. It genuinely stands on its own. And I'm really working hard to try to not like predict what happens. The bummer about this show and House of Dragons is we can just Google how the show ends. You know, we could buy a book and read how the show ends. That sucks. It's an inherent problem with all these prequels, just like running back known quantities, like known entities. They're not inventing something new. They're running back tried and trod material that, you know, smarter people than us or people that are more into it are like already rattling off everything, predicting everything. They see that guy. They're like, oh, that's the guy who does that later. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting to think about this stuff, but genuinely trying to disengage from that and sit back and enjoy these characters. It's great. It's so fun. It's so rewarding. I love it. I mean, but that's the prequel thing is something that and House of the Dragons, man, I mean, House of the Dragons, I'm just petering out on a little bit because it's like, well, I know what's happening and it's not, the payoff isn't good. It's just like, there's not enough of a payoff here. I mean, the rings, it's leading to like an epic it's leading to like a gigantic climax that should be awesome and really fun to enjoy. So I'm pumped about it. One of the things I also wanted to contrast and get your opinion on with like House of Dragons and Rings of Power is I think everybody knows. I don't think this is really a spoiler. People know this about House of Dragons, that there's like time skips in House of Dragons. And so, I mean, I'm sure people know it because there's that there's like that Negroni meme. Have you seen that? Where like the lead actors talking about their favorite drink, a Negroni. It's awesome. So like they have kid actors, they replace them with older actors. And like each episode in like House of the Dragons, there's like a pretty massive time jump. And I understand why they're doing that, but I don't think they handle it well. You kind of skip over a lot of character development. A character ends the previous episode one way and then just starts the next one another, like almost like an entirely different character. And in some cases, a completely different person. and we're just glossing over the fun part, which is like growing and like seeing what happens to these guys, seeing how they fail, seeing how they change and evolve. And then Rings, does have similar like time jumps. Like a lot of time passes in Rings, but it feels smooth. It feels like we're not missing anything. It makes sense. It's the way they handle time And they're also juggling these other stories, which I feel like some stories are like too precious about how all of these different stories line up, right? Like to the minute.
Mhm.
And there's multiple simultaneous stories happening in Rings. And some of them, it's like they might be in a completely different time. They could be happening before this. They could be happening after this, whatever. But they're moving back and forth. Time is passing through all of them. And it's great. It's still just like really good storytelling. It's awesome. They just handled that so well. I mean, what'd you think about like all the time stuff in that, especially compared to House of Dragons? I think it's undeniable.
Yeah, I mean, it really is impossible to keep from comparing these things, and I too will try to keep this spoiler free. But it's interesting how Lord of the Rings has been able to give me what I wanted from House of the Dragons, insofar as when you look at the first season of Game of Thrones, you are introduced pretty much immediately to a very wide cast of characters and a few different locales, and they start up pretty quickly giving you a lot of different stories that are happening in a lot of different places. Whereas House of the Dragons is primarily about family drama that's centered in one family. And so it feels so cloistered comparatively. And it has felt a little bit claustrophobic in the first season of House of Dragons because I want out more. Like any scenes that shine in that tend to be scenes that aren't necessarily within the confines that we're introduced to immediately. So I think it's something, especially with a show whose episodes are 70 fucking minutes long, but I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
I think it really helps to split it up across all these different locations all over Middle Earth. And also, it's a fantasy epic. Having so many different locations in it makes it feel epic. And when they're all handled so well, it doesn't matter if they're not all tying together right now. We're willing to kind of let it blossom and branch out. That said, I will say that Numenor, I don't give a fuck about Numenor. I thought the show was doing great. First couple episodes, I was so happy. Like the first episode specifically, I feel like a lot of people I know that like Lord of the Rings watched, and I asked how it was, and they were like, it's fine. So maybe it was just that I set my bar really low. But when the first episode ended, I was like, this is great. This is so much better. This is so much punchier. It's so much more engaging than I expected from Lord of the Rings property. Second episode kept building on that. Third episode, we got to Numenor, and we stayed in Numenor. Fourth episode, a lot of Numenor. Fifth episode, a whole lot of Numenor. So it reminded me of what we've also talked about in this podcast a few times recently, where it sucks when a movie feels like it's going to really span the entire globe, and then by the second act, you're pretty much locked into the one place the movie's going to take place.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's one of those fun tricks where until you said that, I'm thinking about how many like big the world is and how they're expanding on it. And there's really like 5 locations in this thing. And somehow it feels so big and so epic, and it looks amazing. And even like the Numidor, I don't know, that island with people that, were used to be pals with elves. Mm-hmm. They explain it in a way where I understand why we're spending time here. And I think it's why it's fun to like disengage from everything I've known about Lord of the Rings, because they're re-explaining these relationships. And I understand elves, the concept of elves, better than I ever did in the other movies. There's like these creatures of light. They're from this place, and they come over here, and they just explain the nuances of it well, and they explain the nuances of the politics of the region in a way that like the movies just like never really touch on, in a way that I thought was truly satisfying. So I love that. I was a big fan of that. I didn't mind hanging out in Numenor because I thought it was cool, and I mean they introduced people that were sweet and whatever. I will say, changed my mind on elves. The show has not changed my mind on hobbits.
No.
Famously, my famous hobbit take, the movies would be better if the hobbits weren't in it. Hobbits are useless.
No.
They're a waste of time. I watched The Hobbit. The hobbits suck. There's one good hobbit in The Hobbit, and he's the guy running the show. But every time they're with the hobbits and they're like smoking their pipes and sitting in their round doors with a doorknob in the middle, like they're in fucking Spain or some shit. Who are these people? Who are they trying to impress? I'm tired of them. They're boring. They're not fun. I dislike hobbits. Harfoots, I would take a goddamn bullet for.
My
They need
man.
a kidney. I got 2 for the Harfoots. I love the Harfoots.
Yes.
I'm all in on Harfoots. Like a nomadic people who's like keeping low to the ground. Every time we weren't with there was like a whole episode where we didn't even like touch on the Harfoots. And I was like, what the fuck? What's going on in this battle? Fuck these human lives. Get me back to those Harfoots. Who's this strange man they picked up? I'm 99% sure I know who this is. And I'm excited to see how this goes. The Harfoots, adorable. I don't know who these actors are. They are so sweet and cute and delightful in all their roles. And there's like the guy leading the way, and he's just like a bitter curmudgeon. And when he kicked it, I shed a tear, my dude. I was so invested in this guy. I was so invested. The family moment at the end of the season where she's saying goodbye to her family, it went on like a beat too long, but I was so invested. I was so invested in it until there was a shot of like the main girl's leaving, and then Poppy like comes running up, and they do the shitty slow motion hug that they did in like Lord of the Rings when like Frodo sees his guys and they all come and like jump on the bed and tickle each other with this weird like erotic like slow motion like hug, and the weird like Elijah Woods like ha where he like laughs and his mouth is open for 25 seconds. It was so goddamn awkward, and it must have been an homage. They definitely did it intentionally as like a callback to that moment. It was unnecessary, but the Harfoots again, I love the Harfoots. I'm all in on it. They fixed. Maybe they're supposed to be hobbits. I don't think they do. They're too interesting to be hobbits. These are real characters. Their struggle is real. Their nomadic lifestyle I appreciate and idolize and respect them for. I mean, that's just a huge W for Rings of Power, man. The Harfoots. Fuck hobbits. Harfoots all the way.
First off, I gotta say, that slow motion scene at the end of Return of the King can't come up without me bringing up the sketch Mandalf. It's one of the finest sketches ever put on the internet. It's so funny. It's so fucking stupid. It's so unbelievably funny. Look it up on YouTube. It's just Mandalf. Gandalf with an M.
Link it in the bio.
I'll link it in the bio. You'll never look at that moment again. Second off, Tim, you got me so good. I was so worried. The Harfoots were my absolute favorite thing about this show. Oh my God. Every single time they got scared and they threw their capes over themselves to look like little mounds of grass.
Yes.
It's the cutest thing I've ever seen.
Oh my God.
Oh, I love them so much.
It flushes out the hobbits as characters so well.
Which is great. So that's what I was going to say with both of these prequel series. That's what the goal is, right? Because we know that they can't be building towards something that we haven't seen before. So the goal that these prequel series have to aspire to is that they're going to retroactively make the movie that came before them more fun to watch. So the example I always go to is Rogue One. The ending of Rogue One actually makes The Empire Strikes Back a better movie. I would argue all of Rogue One makes Empire Strikes Back a better movie, which is crazy to think about. But they pull it off. They address every single plot hole from that movie with an entire movie that's just a great heist movie in and of itself. So my hope is that that is what the Rings of Power and House of the Dragon are going to be able to do, is find something new to add on. I'm already excited to go back through. Lauren's never seen any of the Lord of the Rings movies. This was her first exposure to that universe.
Oh, yeah?
So I'm really excited
fun
to go back now, because when Elrond shows up, she loves Elrond. So having Hugo Weaving show up, it's going to be interesting to see how much more robotic Hugo Weaving is playing Elrond than this guy who, was it just me, or could you not stop thinking about Neil Patrick Harris?
He does have like the Neil Patrick Harris head too big, forehead too big.
Mm-hmm.
He I don't know why I'm not critical of anybody's forehead. I have a gigantic forehead. You've
got a great forehead, Tim.
I know I didn't say it wasn't great. I said there's a lot of it.
And a lot to love.
A lot to love. Yeah. Amen, brother. And I think they did a really good job of casting the characters that are supposed to be familiar to us. There's there's foreshadowing in some characters. I mean, I don't even know if I don't even really want to talk about the things there's a couple characters I had to look up, and I was like, what's the deal with this guy? What happens here? I mean, they've introduced a character that ultimately we know is going to fail to throw the ring into Mount Doom. And so that guy's a character, and they are already showing what his character is like and what his like, and you can see where this is going, where he will eventually be somebody who doesn't complete the job, doesn't finish the mission. He's a little too selfish. He doesn't have what it takes to get it through. But then the way they flush out like all these other characters, like the elves and these things and Elrond, I feel like the actors somehow like really look like these guys. I wasn't thinking Neil Patrick Harris. I was kind of like, he's doing a convincing Hugo Weaving in this role. Like, I thought it was good. I thought the Galadriel character was great and like made sense. And I don't know, like in House of Dragons, again, I'm really just shitting on House of Dragons. House of Dragons sucked. When they switch actors in that show, I feel like the actors they switch into like didn't even talk to the people they were playing before. They had just no concept of what they were doing. They'd never been in the same room. They never watched the other person. They are just two completely different takes on the quote unquote the same character. And all of the characters that are familiar in this or that are going to pay off in this show, they feel flushed out. They feel like they're adding more to the legacy of that character. And it feels like they did their research. I think that's like my biggest takeaway from this is it feels like we are in safe hands. Like,
yeah,
it feels like things are going to work out and we're going to get 5 good seasons. I feel like they've already planned things. I feel like they know what's going to happen. I feel like we're going to be happy at the end of this show. I feel like we're going to be satisfied at the end of each season. I feel safe in the loving embrace of Rings of Power in a way where I'm just waiting for House of Dragons to let me down.
Dude, maybe that is the advantage of having this stuff paid for up top. Like, maybe that is the thing of like, they're not worried about whether or not they'll be able to get this stuff paid off. So they're not trying to write something in too quickly because they're worried that, you know, maybe they'll never get to a season 3. I know that's definitely the case with a lot of Marvel stuff because like the schedule, it's insane that there's so much hullabaloo around just whatever schedule for upcoming movies Marvel sets. It's also kind of insane how far in advance they have to set it. But I mean, I get it. These things take time and there's leaks all over the place that people photograph a movie set. But it's nuts that Marvel is constantly fighting this tide where, you know, we have a Fantastic Four movie coming out in 3 years.
Yeah.
And like, it's still a thing where people are already like trying to figure out who the cast is going to be and like what the plot of this movie that I think just hired a writer might be, and how it's going to fit into all these other movies that are coming out in 2024 and 2025. There's such a fervor around that it has to make it really hard to maneuver and make choices of how you're going to, I don't know, position these different properties, knowing that it's going to be like overanalyzed a million times before you can even drop the first trailer. Whereas for Lord of the Rings, they're in uncharted territory. It is a familiar franchise. Like people do have a lot of love for the franchise. So there's a lot of mines in that minefield. But if I'm understanding it right, this entire series was based on like 1 or 2 pages of unfinished notes from a Tolkien manuscript about how some of this stuff might have worked for a book that he never ended up being able to write before he died. So like, they basically had like lists of names and like an incomplete lineage and some other stuff like that to work off of. So there's not really source material for this. They have an ending that they're starting with, which could be a blessing or a curse. And they have a couple elven characters that they know live for hundreds of years that they can play with. But other than that, they really get to surprise us with so much of the other stuff that happens.
What about, wasn't like the Silmarillion? Didn't he write a book, like a prequel thing? But that's like a book, right? That's like, I thought that was like a pretty dense book. I never read it.
Yeah, is this one based on the Silmarillion?
I don't know. I could have sworn the Silmarillion was like a prequel to like The Hobbit.
I know it has a lot of lineage
went back
stuff.
This far.
After I saw Fellowship of the Ring, I really wanted to get like a Lord of the Rings book to read And I think I had a flight coming up. And so I was like, oh, I'll get a book for the flight. I'll get a Lord of the Rings book. And the only Lord of the Rings book they had in the airport was the Silmarillion. And there's like whole huge page sections where it's just, and Ilmenor, who begat Salabil, and Salabil, who famously defeated Ilsagoth at the shadow of the Valar. Like, it's just way too fucking dense.
I'm shocked how approachable this show has been, because I feel like the movies are a little dense, or at least the original trilogy is a little dense, where I'm like, I don't understand why we care about this king. He's not even the real king. So why do we need this guy in order to fight this war? Like, I don't understand all the politics. Maybe I need to rewatch these movies. I feel like I saw them like a couple years ago, but I don't think it's necessarily clear what all of the politics of this entire world and region are. I mean, this show, they have like a map that they, when they switch scenes, they have a map they go to where they like show you where things are in relation to each other.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, oh, this is kind of dumb. And then I was like, oh no, this is like the most helpful. They're making sure that you know exactly what's going on in this thing. So it's my biggest critique of Lord of the Rings. It's like my biggest critique of like high fantasy, like in general, is like, you know, you show up and they spend pages just describing like a family tree. And it's like, I don't give a shit about any of these people. None of these characters are even in the book. Why do I give a shit about like this guy's 8th grandfather? You know, like, who cares? Why do I care what color the leaves are? Just tell me there's trees. I'll fill in the blanks, right? Red leaves on a tree. I like a Hemingway, you know, just like get to the shit, you know, give me the tip of the iceberg. I will flush it out. That's what your imagination is for. You know, you don't have to hand me everything, but someone's describing like each article of clothing that every character wears. And it's like, just show them magic. Just do the magic thing. Show me some Harfoots. Let's have a good time. Why are we wasting all of our time with this stuff?
That's all it takes. You know, one lineage I really do care about? Theo is fucking Arondir's son, right? There's no way Theo isn't Arondir's son. They have never shown us Bronwyn's ears. They have never shown us Theo's ears. One or both of them have to be pointed.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. I'm looking at his picture now. He's a little tan. I mean, I got the actors next to each other and I'm like, they look like you kind of could have mushed them together. I feel like he does look like kind of like he's got some features from both. That is super interesting. That's a great take. I have no idea. I feel like he wasn't, because of the way they interact with each other. It felt like we saw their first kiss on the show.
I don't know. I think it was, I mean, first off, I just can't picture elves having sex in general. Like, my image in my head of two elves having sex is them standing, looking out across a waterfall together and just looking at each other and like nodding out of respect. And coming out of that, one of them is pregnant.
Yeah, like sex by osmosis.
Exactly.
You know, like they're not sweating.
It's no. They're much too proper for that. It's just the suggestion. The mere suggestion is impure enough for them.
I can't imagine the sound of like flesh on flesh, like in an elf being involved. You know, like I just can't imagine like, and an elf would have nothing to do with that. They wouldn't even clap normally, you know?
There's no awkwardness. It would be like
elf sex is silent. They're not moaning. They're not saying anything. They're making extreme eye contact and they're very stiff. I feel like very stiff.
There's like a tree glowing in the background. And then the only noise you hear is in the distance. You hear like,
yeah, you know what? It's probably not even in the distance. It's probably just like all their closest friends and family, just like rounded up, like standing around them in a semicircle, just like all singing together while they make like, you know, impassioned sterile love to each other in a circle. And they're standing. They're definitely standing for this.
Absolutely standing. Yeah.
Elves are all tall, you know, it would work. They're all just standing there, boring, intense eye contact,
not even
slow
shifting.
standing.
It's like
sex.
What was that thing? Soaking that was happening. Like BYU.
I was just thinking about soaking. Dude, the elves are soakers for sure.
There's a lot of overlaps in that Venn diagram.
I feel like soaking isn't even like Like the elves aren't soaking to like get away with anything. They're soaking because like that's the pinnacle. Like soaking is the peak of what elf sex is. It doesn't get better than soaking. The movement? Why would we move? It's in there.
Oh my God.
We don't need to move it around. No. It's going to stay here until I'm done. I'm going to leave it here for 20 minutes.
They're elves. This goes on for days. This is like a Sting situation.
Takes a century, decades we've stood and embraced together. And then she lays an egg and then they just walk away from it.
Yeah. That's it.
I feel like, no, she doesn't. Elves don't give birth. I think it's like they have standing sex near a mighty tree, probably that tree that's like, has all the life force, all their family and friends are there. And that lasts a decade. And then when they're done, just like an acorn falls from the tree, it cracks open and there's just like a tiny little elf
in it.
And then they have to like carry that little elf around, and then he just grows up and then he grows. I don't know. We don't see any elf kids. How long do you think it takes an elf to grow up to mid-30s where they stop?
Interesting. I think the only kids we saw were the very beginning, like the opening of the show. We saw, I'm assuming some of the first.
Oh, we did see kid elves. Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, they were like, that's a situation where they're these like immortal, omnipotent beings that looked 5, but were probably, a millennia old at that point already.
Yeah.
I think it probably takes like I think maybe they grow their first 30 years in the blink of an eye because it just seems too improper to be a child as an elf. I think it is probably like a WandaVision situation where they just kind of will themselves to become an upright person. And so suddenly they're 30 and they already have like 30 human years worth of knowledge. And then they could just go do whatever they want and stick around for 400 years.
Yeah, because in theory, they just like live forever.
Yeah.
Right. Like they just apparently every character lives forever. Like Sauron, Gandalf, whoever these people are, they all just, there's some people where it's like these Harfoots live like to like 25 years old. These are like, Harfoots live short, brutal lives.
Harfoots are
if
like
they're not killed,
flies.
if they're not killed going off trail, they die of old age around 32. These Harfoots are not seeing 40. There's not a damn chance. The guy who led them, who was all old and gray and stooped over, 18 tops. That guy is just these things. They're shorter. They have shorter lifespans. Elves are tall. Dwarves. I don't know how long dwarves. I feel like dwarves at least like a solid 100.
Oh,
like they're still kicking ass at 100 though.
Easy.
You know,
and they're
maybe
damn near
200.
indestructible.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did like the moment of Elrond showing up and being like, and his dwarf friend is pissed off. I'm like, he's like, where have you been? And he's like, I saw you 20 years ago.
That's just how it feels to make friends as an adult.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what are you talking about? I haven't seen you. We went to a Mets game last summer.
What do you mean? We went to high school together. You're my best friend. Remember we had that middle school class and then we never spoke again? I think about you every day. But yeah, it's so funny to be like, I don't think the elfish immortality really hit home with me until this show either, of like the concept of being immortal and living forever and comparing that to like, dwarf friends. Like, I don't know. It's very interesting. Are you excited about Mithril at all?
I was kind of hoping it was going to be something else, but I guess we have to get an origin story for Mithril. If we had to get an origin story for Black Widow's vest in the Black Widow movie, I guess we got to get
and her hair dye.
It was a little bit weird to me that it was a plot point that they needed this Mithril, and then it was like, or we could make an alloy, and the professional metallurgist hadn't thought about that yet. It kind of undercuts like how important the Mithril is in large quantities, because now it's like, oh, so you have way too much of it down in that mine. But hey, you know
we
what?
needed a tiny piece.
Yeah.
We got it immediately. I was wondering where that was going. I'm like, are the elves going to go to war with the dwarves for this Mithril? I mean, it felt like that's where they were going.
Yeah. If they really need this resource.
Yeah.
speaking
And
of,
now they just make 3 rings and everything's good,
call it a day.
which doesn't make any sense to me. The entire species was dying. We made 3 pieces of jewelry and now we're fine. Like, what does that mean? What if they leave? What if one of them heads out? Do they need to stay around the tree? How does that affect a tree? How does me wearing a magical ring make the tree that gives us all, magical immortality, grow better? They're not even watering the tree. They're like, they don't even buy fertilizer. They're just like, there's nothing we can do. Metallurgy is the only answer for this tree. It's like, do you blame the plant or do you blame the environment? The conditions it's in. Maybe you got to trim some things out of the way, give it a little more sun. Maybe you transplant the thing. I'm just, they went right to jewelry and deep ore, magic ore from a dwarven mountain. But
everybody has their thing.
I guess whatever works.
The elves go straight to jewelry. That's their move. That's their move every time.
The elves love jewelry. Do you think every season is going to end with them making another set of rings?
I legitimately think it might, because as soon as they were like, it's going to be 1 ring, I was like, I know this isn't the 1 ring. And then they were like, we figured it out. It needs to be 2 rings. And then somebody else comes through and is like, actually, we realized we need balance. Famously, the number of balance is 3. And then at that point, I'm like, are we going to do this 9 more times? Like, I know there's so many rings. Yeah, I think you're right. I think pretty much each season from here on out, hopefully they get wise to it. And early in the next season, they've already made a lot more rings so that we can just kind of get that out of the way and get to some of the other stuff that's building in the background.
We got to get through these rings. I know the show's called Rings of Power, but we got to get through these rings.
We gotta.
They have to make 9 for the dwarfs. You think they're going to do like 9, 1 an episode next season?
Oh, probably.
Oh man.
I gotta.
Any beefs or thieves, Kevin? Or wait, yeah. What did you want to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I guess a thief for me, and I'm curious to see if you feel the same way. Is I thought it was really interesting that they, despite being different from the original series, they still really nail the tone of the original series, and they nail the world. Like, I still feel like I'm in Middle Earth when I'm watching this show. And it was really interesting to see that, but to also see them explore some ideas that we haven't seen in Middle Earth yet. So specifically, the Arondir fight scenes really stood out to me as being extremely cool and like extremely action-packed and energetic in a way that we absolutely have never seen in a boring-ass Lord of the Rings property before. The fight scenes kicked ass. The chain stuff he was doing up against the orcs, when they pulled the chains taut and he ran up the chains to take down that booth. Oh my God.
That was awesome. When Galadriel ran up the sword in like the first episode, I was like, I need more of this shit.
And the blood splattered on the screen?
Yeah.
That's not Lord of the Rings, but I like what it is.
I'm shocked this is holding my attention, to be honest. I'm shocked. Maybe it's just because I watched House of the Dragon and it was so bad that I'm like really just putting all my energy into House of Rings. But it's crazy because like Lord of the Rings and Tolkien are so I feel like it's so almost boring at this point of like, this is like the basis of like all fantasy. Mm-hmm. To some extent. There's like elves, there's dwarves. He's defined those relationships. J.K. Rowling is just like stealing shit for like her book. Like every fantasy book since then, and maybe Tolkien isn't like the originator of these concepts, but it feels like he put them in a format that has been since replicated by a million fantasy books. Mm-hmm. And it feels like it should be burned out. It feels like we've seen every iteration of this. It feels that it maybe his original content doesn't feel original anymore because we've gotten so much else of it that has come through that's like been an imitation of it. So I'm pleasantly surprised that I'm learning anything in this, that the world is expanding, that we're getting more out of it. I'm shocked that they're finding new ways to like flesh this world out. It's really crazy. I'm excited for the next season. I don't know when it's happening.
Me too.
We're probably gonna have to wait a whole year. Can you imagine? Do TV shows really take like a whole year to make? Like, are we really gonna have to? It felt like we were just crushing things for a while, and now it's like, oh no, we have to wait a whole year for season 2. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah, it's nuts when people I feel like
Yeah.
there have been a lot of things where it's like almost like a shock drop. Like, yeah, a season of something will come out and then it's like, hey, by the way, season 2, that's coming out in 3 months. Like, oh, that's too soon. I don't want it that soon. But I would take another Rings of Power season in, hell, I'd take one in 3 months. I'd take one kick off the new year.
10
It'd be
years?
great. Yeah.
It'd be great. We could get another one soon. I hope it doesn't take too long. But
Me too.
yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it for the pod, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's
I
it.
feel like we said everything.
I think we
There's
got
nothing
there.
else to say.
Let me hit the theme music. I think I
Hit
closed
that
the app.
sweet theme music.
Here we go.
Go Harfoots, man. I'm gonna
Go
I need a
Harfoots.
shirt that's like Harfoots over Hobbits.
Oh,
That's what I
what's it?
want on a
Hobbits
shirt.
never, Harfoots forever.
Harfoots forever. God, beautiful and inspiring people.
They're just the best.
They never go. Stay on trail, baby. Even though adventures are off trails where the adventures are.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Nerdy for 30. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave us 5-star rating wherever you're listening. Send us an email, nerdyfor30@gmail.com. Until then, stay nerdy. I'm trying to remember I'm blanking. I'm trying to remember what we're doing next week, but I already can't remember it.
What are we doing next week? Are we doing Black Adam next week?
Yeah, next week's Black Adam. Wow, look at that. The power
baby,
dynamic
baby.
in
It'll
the
be
DC universe
fun.
is about to shift. Tim, I got a prompt for you over the closing credits today.
All right.
There's that wonderful scene where the Harfoots are talking about people that they lost. I wanted to know if you would do me the absolute pleasure of riffing a couple Harfoot names and the causes of death that made them get left behind on the trail.
The names are tricky, but like Bibido, Harfoot, ostrich attack. I feel like it was all like one of them was like Poppy, so it's like onion, onion patty wag, stepped on. Chives McGillicuddy. Drowned. Sugar molasses. Falling fall. Just fall. I feel like these Harfoots are like dying left and right. I bet they have like 8 kids at a time, and they just lose a dozen, 20 people every time they go on one of these travels. It's crazy.
They gotta have
and they just
babies
leave
like
people
Catholics.
behind. Oh, and they will leave your ass behind too. They're like, you're in the back. Like the Harfoots aren't pirates, man. They will leave your ass away,
Hell no.
It's crazy. You'd think as like a group they'd just be like, okay, we can wait up for you. We don't have to sprint to this apple orchard. We can walk.
I think that's their fatal flaw. Is they're charming, but they're all very selfish. They just love indulging.
They are selfish.
They're very vulnerable, so they have to stick together. But god damn it, if a Harfoot isn't selfish.